Welcome to Transform Pod. You're here today with Heather and your co-host Caitlin. So today we're going to be diving into a topic that's often misunderstood but affects millions of people, and it's Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, or known as OCD. There's so many misconceptions surrounding this mental health condition, so today we're going to clear up some of those and learn what living with OCD really means. So Caitlin not only lives with OCD, but she's also really dedicated in sharing her personal journey to help others better understand the disorder. So she's here down to break down any myths and offer some powerful insights from her own life. So this is going to be a really good one. So thanks, Caitlin.
No problem at all.
So first we'll talk about some of the misconceptions about OCD. So myth 1, that OCD is just about being tidy or wanting things done in a specific order. So in reality, OCD can manifest in a variety of ways, from intrusive thoughts to compulsive behaviours, and it's not always related to cleanliness and organisation. Myth 2, have you got that myth?
So people with OCD can just snap out of it or stop their compulsions if they try hard enough.
So in reality though, these compulsions are driven by overwhelming anxiety, and it's not a matter of willpower, but it's a complex mental health issue that requires proper treatment, and Caitlin's going to really delve into that today. And also, people think that OCD is rare, when in reality OCD affects about 1 to 2% of the population, which means millions of people are living with the condition.
Also, just to add to that as well, Heather, a lot of people who have OCD are often misdiagnosed. They're misdiagnosed with anxiety, they're misdiagnosed with depression, or other types of disorders. So the severity of the amount of people that's got OCD is actually, it's probably a lot less on the statistics than what it should be, because people aren't diagnosed properly.
And is this because obviously OCD can mimic other disorders?
Yes, so for years I was told that I had an anxiety disorder and that everything I was experiencing was just anxiety, generalised anxiety disorder, when in reality it was OCD, and it took a professional who knew OCD to recognise those symptoms rather than just a mental health professional who wasn't OCD specialised.
So can you explain what OCD is in your own words and how it's different from the stereotypes that people often hear?
Yeah, so OCD in itself is a doubt disorder. So OCD quite literally attacks the things that you value the most. So people will often hear that there is themes within OCD, and the types of themes that you have is often based on the things that you value in your life, or the things that will cause the most anxiety in you. So for instance, the contamination OCD, if people have got kids, they'll be scared of germs being around the house because they're scared that the kids will die from the germs. Therefore, they are consistently cleaning their house, and they become contamination orientated, or what people would say stereotyped as being excessively clean, and constantly not wanting any mess or dirt or anything around the house. But in reality, it's not that.
I think a lot of people can get really upset by that as well, don't they? Because OCD can be used as like, I've got OCD, and people can kind of say it flippantly because they perceive OCD to be a cleaning thing, and this is often the way it can be portrayed sometimes.
Yeah, and I see that quite often. I see it on social media when people will, do a cleaning video, but I'm just so OCD, and I think, unless you've got the debilitating thoughts, images, anxiety, depression that comes with OCD, then you do not have OCD. Just because you like a clean and organised environment does not mean that you have OCD. It means you like a clean and tidy environment, and that's the top and bottom of it.
Yeah.
OCD is categorised specifically by the intrusive thoughts, the intrusive images, the intrusive urges, the impulses that come with it, and then the compulsions that take over your life.
So everyone's experience with OCD is different. Can you share your own personal experience? So, how does OCD manifest for you, and what are some of the compulsions and intrusive thoughts that you deal with?
So for me, it was really difficult to get diagnosed because I have something called pure O, where I don't really have any outward compulsions. All my compulsions are inward, and pure O is defined as mental compulsions. So you have all the intrusive thoughts and intrusive images, but you're not doing a specific behaviour. Instead, you're consistently ruminating in your mind. And this is why it took so long for me to be diagnosed, because it just wasn't very obvious. And the intrusive thoughts that I was having at the time, or what I had over a span of 3 or 4 years, I wouldn't speak out about them because I was either ashamed or I was embarrassed or I didn't think it was normal, and I was too scared to let anybody know these types of thoughts that were going on in my head. So for instance, one of my OCD themes was to do with being a serial killer. I was watching a programme on the TV to do with serial killing, and this person had a traumatic childhood. They experienced, a lot of adverse childhood trauma, something which I've experienced, and in my head I instantly flipped to, okay, so they've had this trauma, they've experienced this in their childhood, they then went on to be a serial killer. What's to say I'm not? And I spent 3 or 4 months after that convincing myself in every way possible that I was not going to become a serial killer. Now this would have been by, I would mentally compulse on doing good things for people. I'd be like, right, well I've done, I've took this person here and I've been really nice to this person today and I love being around people and I'm so talkative and I'm so happy, so therefore I can't be a serial killer. And I spent 3 or 4 months going through that, but on a night time the intrusive thoughts and the intrusive images would kick in, and this would be images of me being a serial killer, so they were extremely debilitating. It would affect my sleep, it would affect my mood, it would affect my eating because I wouldn't eat, it would affect every single aspect of my life. My uni work at the time, where I couldn't concentrate on getting stuff done because I was so overcome by the thoughts and the images that I was having. And that's just a tiny snippet over the last 4 years of what OCD's caused me. But in a nutshell, the majority of my OCD that I've experienced is intrusive thoughts, images and debilitating anxiety that comes on the side of it.
And can you take us back to when you first started noticing the symptoms of OCD? So like, how old were you when you sort of really got those early signs when you thought something wasn't quite right?
So for me, looking back now, I can see things in my childhood that were possibly similar to OCD, if pure the same as what I experience now, where I would, revisit things consistently and I'd obsess over everything. Any little thing I'd be obsessed about, and I'd have anxiety off the back of it. But at the time it was just put down to childhood anxiety. I had a bit of therapy and eventually it went away until COVID first hit, and I had a horrific panic attack, overthinking I wouldn't be able to breathe, and I'd be in hospital and I couldn't control it and I didn't know what to do. And ever since that point I've had multiple different themes of OCD. I've had multiple panic attacks, multiple incidents where I've had to stay in the house and I've had to not go to work and I couldn't eat and I couldn't sleep because the OCD has just took over and it's ended up in this vicious loop. But the first time I would say I properly noticed it was about, I would say maybe last year or the end of the year before, where I actually thought, no, hold on, this isn't just anxiety, this has got to be something else, because it wasn't normal. The people I seen with anxiety didn't experience the thoughts or didn't voice the thoughts that I was having, so it couldn't be the same as what everybody else was experiencing.
So I remember this because obviously, if you've followed along Transform Pod and follow our social media platforms, that me and Caitlin run this business together, and we did our psychology degree together. And so I knew Caitlin as she was getting her diagnosis, and she was being diagnosed with anxiety, and just didn't feel like that was the right diagnosis. So it can be quite long and confusing. Can you talk about your experience of getting diagnosed with OCD and what that process was like?
I had quite a horrific experience being diagnosed, actually. I'd been to the doctors multiple times to discuss the anxiety I was experiencing. I had 2 rounds of CBT, intensive CBT. That was still, although it helped with the initial anxiety thoughts, I still had the underlying anxiety consistently every single day. I then had done my own research into OCD, which all of the thoughts and feelings and images and urges and everything I was having aligned with OCD. So I rang the doctors back, explained the symptoms in depth for over half an hour on the phone, and I was basically laughed off the phone and told, try propranolol, you've got an anxiety disorder, and I was told, I hope that this gets better for you because you don't want to be experiencing this for the next 20 years, which I don't know if you remember, Heather. Like you're feeling quite deflated.
I do remember. You felt quite embarrassed and ashamed because you kind of, it was like sort of laughter in your face, really, wasn't it?
Well, I think the thing that made me feel so embarrassed was it was the first time that I had opened up about the thoughts that I had been having. It was that doctor was quite possibly the first person that I had in depth told, but like you, where I'd spoke about little bits of things, about everything that was going on, and for him to just sort of laugh me away, I thought, okay, well, he's a professional, he's a doctor, so maybe I haven't got OCD, maybe I've just been imagining it. But obviously having like support like yourself and my family and friends support, it helped me sort of see it from a different perspective. And I thought, no, I'm going to fight this. I know I've got OCD, I know the symptoms I'm having, I know they align with this, so I'm going to push to try and get a diagnosis. So I did. I went back to the doctors. I seen another doctor. I got referred for a OCD assessment with the community mental health team. Waited a few weeks for this to come back. It got declined because I wasn't severe enough to be seen, or they didn't think I was severe enough to be seen by the mental health team. I then rang the doctors again and explained it all again, and I just basically said, look, like, I'm telling you the symptoms I'm having, I'm telling you how it's affecting every aspect of my life, I'm telling you I don't sleep, I barely eat, I can't function, I can't concentrate, I'm crying out for help, and you're pushing me away, and you're not telling me, like, you're not helping me get a diagnosis of what I need. And that's when the doctor turned around and said, no, everything you've told me perfectly aligns with OCD, and I can tell you right now you are experiencing OCD. And finally I felt relief, because I was like, oh my god, somebody has acknowledged that what I'm experiencing is OCD, like it's not just an anxiety disorder. And I was officially diagnosed, and yeah.
And I think it's really important to know though that, you know, if your symptoms are not seen as severe enough, then people are struggling to get a diagnosis. But, you know, what are the classing as, you know, severe? Has somebody really got to be on the very bottom to, you know, to get any sort of help? And this is when you're dealing with intrusive thoughts and your mental health is struggling, anxiety, you know, these early diagnoses can be, you know, really paramount to somebody's well-being and, you know, overcoming sort of the challenges that they are faced with daily.
Well, because I wasn't with the community mental health team, because I wasn't in immediate danger, I wasn't self-harming, I wasn't, you know, severely depressed, they didn't see it as urgent, and because they didn't see it as urgent, they refused to see me.
So obviously you ended up getting a diagnosis. Did that bring up any more questions or any fears for you when you once received the diagnosis?
So for the first few days after I received the diagnosis, everything was great. I felt on top of the world. I cried, happy tears. I thought, this is it. This is a new leaf for me. I understand what I've got. It's not my fault what I've got. And I can learn to work through it. And I'll do all the self-help and the research and everything to, you know, push my way through this disorder, because I was such a, you know, a bit of a nerd when it came to books and research and things like that anyways. But one of my biggest OCD themes was a fear of getting depression, and that OCD theme stuck with me for I'd say the past 2 years. So I started doing research on TikTok, and the first thing that came up on TikTok was that OCD is so debilitating, it makes you depressed and it makes you, you know, hate your life and X, Y and Z. And I just went into meltdown mode. I couldn't then understand how I was ever going to get through this, because I've spent so much of my life trying to, you know, avoid depression by having specific routines, by doing self-care, by constantly learning and getting new knowledge on things, and, you know, making sure that I'm always looking after myself in every form, whether that be food or vitamins or drinking enough water. I was constantly, you know, doing these things to make sure I would never get depressed. And now I'm stuck with this disorder that's internal, that I can't get rid of, I can't cure, that is going to make me depressed. And I went into complete panic mode for about a week, I think it was, where I was just, it was almost like a paralysis. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think, but I didn't want to think, because I thought, now I've got OCD, I'm never going to be able to stop thinking. My mind's never going to stop, because now I've got this disorder that's going to make me think everything around me is an intrusive thought and everything around me is a danger. So yeah, that was quite intense after I got diagnosed. I'm finally through it now and on the other end of it, and can see that, you know, I'm not going to be thinking forever, and I'm not going to be in an OCD cycle forever. But at that time, it almost felt like my life was ruined.
And I do think it's important to be careful, with social media. Sometimes the content that is being put out there can actually make, somebody really, really worry that that's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
When in matter of fact, everybody is different and they're going to have a different experience with it.
Yeah.
So was there any misconceptions about OCD that you believed yourself, and how did your understanding of OCD evolve once you got your diagnosis?
So I think the biggest misconception I had at that time was that I was never going to be able to stop thinking. So, because I'm now diagnosed with OCD, I must obsess about everything. So that was a big misconception, because I do have moments now where I'll go into like a flare up with my OCD, and I will for a few days or maybe a week consistently obsess in my mind and consistently be stuck internal instead of external, but I always come out on the other end of it. And I think that's such an important thing to remember, that you might be stuck within the cycle of OCD right now, and you might think that it's going to last forever, but you always come out on the other end. It doesn't matter when, it just always happens, because it's human nature. Things change and things evolve, and your mind will end up being moving on to something else, and you'll come out of the other end of this tunnel. So I think that was an important misconception to be challenged. Sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Just how your understanding of OCD evolved. So once you got the diagnosis, now I know you love, all of the self-help stuff, so you really went deep into OCD to understand it. So do you feel there was any other ways that it evolved once you'd got your diagnosis?
Yeah, massively. I think my basic understanding, obviously, with doing the psychology degree and learning about mental health, was always that you'll have obsessions and you'll have compulsions, but I didn't understand how in-depth the obsessions and compulsions could be. I didn't understand that there was so many different themes, and to be honest, when I first started researching it, when I was diagnosed with OCD, I just assumed that it must just be the really taboo thoughts, like a lot of people will have, like serial killing or violence or paedophilia and things like that, and I thought that must just be what OCD focuses on. But the more that I've researched and the more that I've gained to know about OCD, it actually just targets what you value. So if you value being a good person and not violent, you will probably have thoughts of being violent, and that's your intrusive thoughts. If you value being around children and you love spending time with the children in your family, you possibly may have those paedophilia or intrusive thoughts, because it targets what you value and it puts doubt in your mind, and it's the doubt that is the OCD.
So once you had the diagnosis, what kind of support did you start seeking? Because I know you said that you did some CBT, so did you try medication or any other forms of treatment?
Yes, so I'll be honest, I was always against medication for anything other than, like psychosis, schizophrenia, because I thought there's always a way and a means to help yourself, and medication isn't always the answer. But at the time when I had been first diagnosed and I ended up having a panic attack that lasted for a while, I felt so vulnerable that the medication the doctors had prescribed me, I took, and I was put on fluoxetine, which was a 20 milligram dose. I had a really hard time with the fluoxetine when I first started taking it. I think for about a month I had really intense symptoms, insomnia, severe anxiety, feelings of just being completely out of sorts. This is all when I first started taking the medication, so it interacted with the panic attack I was having. It made everything feel a whole lot worse. But after then I come out of it and I was still on the fluoxetine, and I eventually have just decided to fully come off it because I didn't feel like I needed it, and I still don't feel like I need it, but I know there is a lot of people out there where the medication helps their OCD, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. If you need those meds to make you feel better and to help you even just quiet those intrusive thoughts slightly, then do it. It's what works best for you. Medication just didn't work best for me. However, therapy did.
So do you think that's what has helped you the most in managing your OCD?
Yeah, so again, when I was first diagnosed, I was really desperate because of how I was feeling. I started paying for a private therapist who taught me a little bit about OCD. I then ended up getting onto talking therapies with an OCD specialised therapist who talked me through exposure and response prevention therapy. He talked me through sometimes how trauma can, be the sort of bread and butter for how OCD presents itself, but also how you develop OCD. He taught me a lot. He taught me a lot of ways to manage and deal with it. Although there's still a lot more for me to learn, and I'm still not, I'm not anywhere close to having it fully managed. I feel like therapy was such a big eye opener for me because it just gave me the support for someone to guide me through what I needed to do.
So do you feel that there's like any part within your OCD journey where your symptoms are more severe?
Yes. So whenever I feel hormonal, probably about a week before I'm due on my period, I get really bad intrusive thoughts, and that's how I always know that I'm coming on my period, because the intrusive thoughts kick in every single time. Whenever I feel slightly hormonal, or if I'm even feeling like if I'm about to come on and I feel just that premenstrual, like, I don't know what word to use to describe it.
I know what you mean, but it's when your brain goes quiet. So before your period.
Just before your period, yeah. Well, there's a word. I think that's when it hits me the most, and I just have to learn to navigate that, and I have to learn to understand that, a lot of women who have OCD may struggle more when it comes to their menstrual cycle, and research shows that women do suffer more when it comes to their menstrual cycle because of the hormones surging around your body. You tend to just feel everything a lot more intensely, and that is just something that we have to navigate, and we have to understand, because I always feel like when you understand something, you can handle it a lot better.
So do you think that this is something that a lot of people are aware of, that it could be that the OCD symptoms are going to get worse around the period?
No, I don't think so at all. When I first noticed, I was in therapy at the time, and I had mentioned it to my therapist, and he says that's so common that people will, their scores on their questionnaires that they would do for therapy would always go up with OCD or anxiety at the time when their period was due, because of the different hormones that are flowing through the body. And I don't think it's recognised as much, and I think if people knew, right, I'm due on, and this is probably why my intrusive thoughts are sky high at the moment, it would be a lot easier for them to manage.
So obviously, some people can assume that OCD is something that you can just control, but we know that's not the case. So how do you manage your OCD on like a day-to-day basis, especially when the symptoms are strong, like around your period?
I think it's more so about learning to not engage with them, which is probably the hardest thing mentally I've ever had to do. But learning to just, I don't know what that was, learning to just let the thoughts be there, not react to them, or not allow myself to ruminate when the thoughts come. Acknowledge that it's just the doubt disorder, it's part of OCD, it's not who I am as a person, it's got nothing to do with my morals, nothing to do with my values. I have got an OCD journal in the house where I can look at it and I can remind myself of all the things that I've learned over the time. So I don't necessarily document what's happened with my OCD. I document all the little quirks that I learn about OCD, and I can go back and I can read it and just refresh myself of, oh, actually, this is what I need to focus on with OCD and not the intrusive thoughts. It's still hard at times, don't get me wrong. It was just the other night I had a panic attack where I had an intrusive thought into my head and I felt like I had no control, and I ended up having a panic attack and I was sick, and I didn't sleep. But then the next morning I carried that anxiety with me and got on with my day. I carried on doing what I would do if I wasn't anxious, and the anxiety throughout the day drifted off. And I think it's a personal journey as well as a journey that needs, a professional sometimes to intervene and give you guidance on what to do. It's also personalised to you, because what works for one may not work for the other.
Yeah, and I know that you've said, and you say this a lot, you've to just sit with that anxiety, because a lot of times, we fear the anxiety, it's that feeling inside that we don't like, and causes us more anxiety, which, increases, the anxiety, so it's like a vicious cycle. So learning to sit with it and being like, well, yeah, this is anxiety, I'm okay, it can't harm us. And I know that's something that you do on your journey with OCD. So I know you said earlier that, you know, you don't really have outward compulsions, but, you know, yours is more intrusive and inward ones. So what's going on in your mind during those moments?
I could
go down a rabbit hole now.
I could write a book.
Maybe just one or two then.
So during that moment when I am experiencing intrusive thoughts, what goes on through my mind is me trying to rationalise them. I try and rationalise them, I try and minimise them, I try and spin them to a positive effect. So for example, when I've had an intrusive image in the past of the violent ones that I explained before, if I had an image of someone being stabbed, I would switch that image in my mind. I would change it to be a positive. So in any way, possible form that I could, I would maybe change the image to be like, oh no, it was a pretend knife. They weren't really stabbed, and look at the end of it, they're fine. And I would literally picture this step by step in my head to neutralise the image, which was the main thing that I would do. Or if I had an intrusive thought, I would be like, no, you know, it's impossible because you do X, Y and Z, so you can't be this, or this can't be true. And I would always try and neutralise the feelings, rationalise it, but I wouldn't just do it for 10-15 minutes. I would do it for hours and hours and hours, sometimes days and days and days. It was constant.
So obviously, you know, you're learning like different ways to sort of manage these intrusive thoughts. So when you reflect on your journey from, you know, before you've had your diagnosis and things like that, do you feel like you've had a turning point where you feel more in control of your OCD, or at least more capable of managing it? Or when you have those intrusive thoughts, do you kind of feel hit back at the beginning of it?
I feel so much better now. I feel the only way I can describe what I've felt over the last 4 years is not in control. I didn't feel like anything in my life was right. I felt like I was surrounded by this fog that I couldn't get out of. I felt claustrophobic. I felt not capable and inadequate. I just felt like a shell of a person. I didn't even know who I was. I didn't know what I was. I couldn't think about anything because all I could think about was the OCD I was experiencing. So the person that I was gone. Whereas now I'm learning to know myself again. I'm learning to understand myself again and love little things about myself. So whether that be me being nerdy and, you know, constantly heading a book or in research, enjoying different things like enjoying cooking or enjoying cleaning around the house or enjoying shopping, my impulsive spending, really impulsive. All of these little things I would do on autopilot. But now I'm learning to throw myself into them, so I feel like I've got a new lease of life. I feel like I'm a new person and I actually value myself. I've got confidence, I feel capable, I feel in control again, and I think that's the main part. The fog's gone and I feel like I can control my life again.
I do remember when you got the diagnosis of OCD, and obviously there were some times where you really struggled with it and you really struggled to realise, you know, all the things that you'd overcome to that point. And that's why I think it's important with anybody, you know, with OCD or any mental health disorder, you know, when you are overcoming something, to try and remember that in the difficult times, because it shows that you have a lot of inner strength, and, you know, this is going to help you pull through those dark moments again.
I think credit to you, Heather, to be honest, because the last really bad OCD spiral that I had, I'd rang you during the night, because mine always hits on a night time. I've always got anxiety.
And luckily I don't sleep, so.
Yes, luckily Heather gets about 3 hours. So I remember ringing you and explaining to you this OCD thought that I had, and we talked through it, and you reminded me about everything I'd overcome and everything I was capable of and everything I'd achieved over however many years, and that really grounded me and brought me back sort of down to reality of, okay, you know, I can handle this. Yes, it's caused me a panic attack, it's caused me to be sick, it's caused me to feel a type of way, but actually you're right, I can handle this. And I think sometimes that's all you need, is someone with a clearer perspective to give you that bit of support, and it's really underestimated on how magical that can be for someone.
Support is definitely important for people, but there is people out there that don't have support. So from my professional viewpoint, I would say, when you feel like you've overcame something, that was difficult for you, make notes of this. And then when you are having this difficult moment where you feel like, oh, I can't overcome this, you have it there in black and white, you've wrote it down. Actually, I've overcame this and I've overcame that. So I'm not really giving myself enough credit here for actually how strong I am.
Yeah.
And I think, because it is, a lot of people don't have that support network around them, which is really, really important, when we're having, difficulties within our life.
Yeah, I agree.
So, OCD, like you've said, can be isolating at times. So were there any moments where you felt like nobody understood what you were going through?
Oh, for the whole time. Up until I was diagnosed, for the whole time, I didn't think anyone understood me, even the closest people to me. So my mum and partner and stuff, they had no idea what I was going through, either A, because they didn't understand it, or B, because they just assumed I had anxiety and I was an anxious person and overthinker. They had no idea the emotional turmoil and the debilitating, horrific nights I experienced over those 3 to 4 years. They had no idea what they entailed, and it was so isolating because nobody around me has OCD. Nobody around me experienced what I experienced in my close knit people.
Yeah.
So for me, I was just odd. I was, I just had to accept that I was this person that clearly had these horrific thoughts. They meant something, and I just need to deal with it and carry on with life, which was probably the most hurtful and upsetting thing that I had to go through, was accepting that, okay, these thoughts may be a part of me and I've just got to deal with it, before I knew I had OCD.
Yeah. So is that how you feel like you navigated it, just sort of accepting, well, this is it, this is who I am? Yeah. And I sometimes think, although it's easy to say self-acceptance, that can be one of the hardest things. Mm-hmm. If there's something that you either don't like about yourself or something you want to change about yourself, but you have to accept that it is part of you, that can be really difficult for people to do.
100%. And I just had to accept it, because I thought, well, I don't know what it is. It clearly isn't just anxiety, but whatever's happening is causing me anxiety, and I just had to learn to accept the fact that maybe these horrible thoughts are who I am as a person, which was the scariest part. But I think in me accepting them allowed me to handle this debilitating anxiety a lot better, even though I still had it every single day, because I thought, deep down, it's weird, it's hard to explain, because deep inside I knew I was never this person.
Yeah.
But in accepting that the thoughts were there, it almost made the anxiety a little bit easier, because it was like, oh, here we go again, I'm having these thoughts again.
So we talked a little bit earlier about like misconceptions, and then obviously you've just said there, you didn't really feel too understood about with family and friends, and even the doctor kind of laughed you out the office the first time you went. So how do you educate people around you? Do you sit and explain your OCD to them, or do you get them to look up stuff? Do you feel when you're telling them about the OCD now that they're understanding it more, or do you still feel quite isolated?
No, I mean, I don't feel isolated anymore, because I know there's a wider OCD community across social media and across different therapy networks, but I still feel like the people around me, bar the people who know it in depth, like you and maybe a few others, they just still see it as anxiety, or they'll still see it as a disorder that is not as severe. They don't see how delicate and how intense OCD is. They just don't see it. They see it as this word that's thrown around, and because of the stereotypes, that's why they see it that way. That's thrown around as something that's not, it's not an issue. You don't need therapy, you don't need meds, you don't need anything, you just get on with it and deal with it. But
it's a stigma around it, isn't it? I mean, I remember after my mum passed away, I really started getting quite a lot of anxiety, and I was constantly getting anxiety and feeling really, really anxious. And somebody said, you can just get over it. It's nothing anxiety. You've just got to ignore it. And then a couple of years later, they got anxiety and actually turned around to us and went, I'm so sorry that I played down your anxiety, because it's absolutely horrendous. And I think sometimes if people haven't experienced it themselves, or, you know, they don't really know mental health in depth. They just kind of shut it down, like, oh, intrusive thoughts, just think about something else, or just don't be anxious. Are you depressed? Don't be sad. Put a smile on your face.
Do something that makes you happy.
Well, this is it, you know, and it's, you know, it's this kind of stigma around these things that, you know, that these can just be pushed through and people can get over it when it's really, really quite difficult.
I do understand it to an extent, because I think when you haven't had any type of anxiety, or you've had very minimal mental health issues within your life, it's very, very difficult to see from a perspective of someone who is struggling. It's easy to be empathetic, which, you know, just get over, it's maybe not empathetic. It's very easy to be empathetic if that's how you are as a person, but it's very hard to understand. You will never understand how intense and how severe it feels within your own mind and body until you experience it yourself. And I think it's a shame, because it would be nice if everyone understood. Not everyone experienced it, but if everyone just had that level of understanding of, oh, actually I know this causes this, this and this, so let me be the support network that I need to be. But it's just not the way it works.
I do think that the world is changing though. I think, you know, years ago, and I even remember from, you know, when I was you never really heard people talk about like anxiety and depression and things like that. And now, you know, the stigma is sort of slowly but surely coming away from it, and people are being educated more and more around mental health. That hopefully, you know, in 100 years' time, you know, when people say, you know, I've got OCD, I've got intrusive thoughts, people, you know, people will be more understanding of it, because I definitely think that the world is changing.
Yeah, that is true.
So what advice would you give to someone who suspects that they might have OCD, but, you know, they're unsure or they're afraid to seek a diagnosis?
I think the main thing that I picked up there was afraid to seek the diagnosis. Don't let the fear put you off, because being diagnosed and understanding that that's what it is, and being able to get the help and support because you've got the diagnosis in place, is paramount to the disorder itself.
And I do think, you know, there's a lot of people sort of don't want something to be tied to them, like they'll not want a diagnosis of OCD or depression or ADHD because they feel like they'll be stigmatized, you know, of being like crazy, or, you know, there's something wrong with them if they have this diagnosis.
I do get it. A lot of people just don't want to accept it. They feel like, you know, if I don't acknowledge this, it might go away, but it's just not how it works. With OCD, because OCD is within your brain, it's actually being looked at now, rather than a mental health disorder, it's being looked at as a neurodiversity.
Yeah.
Under the neurodiversity umbrella, sorry. Because it's within your brain, it's with you for life. It doesn't go away. You have to learn how to manage it. You have to learn the strategies and the coping strategies. You have to expose yourself to things, and you have to sometimes get a little bit of support and advice if it is affecting your life. So ignoring it isn't going to help the problem, and being, you know, fearful of telling somebody about it is almost adding to the stigma that's already out there, because people aren't getting the diagnosis that they need. They're not adding to the diagnosis, so people aren't recognising how bad OCD is. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think it's important for yourself though, if you are suffering with this, to get help. I know there's people out there who maybe suffer with it really mildly and don't need the help, but if it is affecting every part of your life and it is something that's taken over and not allowing you to just live a life, you know, free of these horrible intrusive thoughts or free of the anxiety that comes with them, then just go and get that help. That's the more. And if you don't want to, open up to somebody close to you, do your own research online, get all the self-help books you can and all the self-help websites, and try and do it yourself. Even if you do, you know, you don't have to tell anybody, but at least do something.
So looking back, if you were to speak to yourself, you know, before, you know, you had your diagnosis, before you started getting these intrusive thoughts, what would you tell yourself? You know, if you could foresee this coming, and, you know, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself not to lose myself in the process, and to always remember how strong and how resilient I am, and how I've achieved everything I've ever needed to achieve, because I'm a strong-headed person and I put my mind to get what I want. Always the hard way, because I always like a bit of hard work, but I'll just always try and strive to accomplish things, and I will always remind myself of that if I had the opportunity before OCD, because I did lose myself in the process, and it took me a long time, and I've lost a lot of years of my prime time of life because I was so stuck on these thoughts.
And just, it's a worry that maybe it'll never get better and that it'll always be this way.
I've lost happy memories. I've lost holidays where I've went on where OCDs took over. I've lost days out. I've lost family days. I've lost, days off where I could be relaxing. I've lost all sorts within this time period of having OCD, and I would do anything not to lose that again.
Yeah, but I think this is what you do every day, don't you? Because you are constantly doing anything you can to manage your OCD, and then when if it does start to become bad again, and it's it's starting to take over a bit, you've got a better way of navigating that. So it's not going to take you as long to get over that sort of part.
Yeah, which I think has been so key to my recovery. That's still ongoing. Is learning to just accept myself for who I am.
So we've talked about OCD and how the different forms that it can take and stuff, and people's different experiences with it. So how do you think the media's portrayal of OCD differ from the reality that you've experienced?
I think it differs massively. I think, have you ever seen the programme Obsessive-Compulsive Cleaners?
No.
So it's a programme about cleaners who have OCD, and the majority of them have been diagnosed with OCD, but it's just particularly focused on the cleaners. It's particularly focused on people with contamination OCD who clean for about 9-10 hours of the day, and it really takes over their life and it's really debilitating for them. But that's the only OCD programme out there. There's nothing else.
Definitely, before I've done any psychology degree or anything, if somebody had said OCD to me, I would have said cleaning. You know what I mean? And that is just purely because that is and has been put out there, and that's all I knew about it. How do you think that affects people that live with the condition?
I think it affects people in a number of ways. I think firstly it affects people by they don't understand that they've got OCD because there's not enough awareness about it, but not only that, there's not enough awareness of what the OCD actually entails, so it affects them by them not even understanding that they've got it. But I also think it affects people because nobody's acknowledging the stress that they're under. So people acknowledge depression, anxiety, PTSD, any severe mental health disorders, and they acknowledge them by, that must be so awful to go through, I'm here for any support and whatnot. But OCD, it's, it'll be fine, you just like a bit of organisation.
And I do think within social media as well, depending on what's trending and things like that, I don't really ever see much OCD, and I know that if anybody's been on our page, it's Transformed Life Coaching, which is on TikTok and Instagram, and there's a lot of OCD videos on there by Caitlin, because she does want to educate people and she does talk about her personal experiences on it, because it can just help people feel less alone and be more understood. So I think definitely putting more education about it into the world is going to help people not only living with OCD, but maybe somebody that's friends with somebody with OCD, or a partner and things, because it can help you to support them through their journey.
100%. I think it's awareness is key, but also knowledge is key as well. So if you've got the awareness and you've got people seeing it all over, and then you've got the knowledge that comes with that because you're educating at the same time, I feel like that's something that can help conquer the stigma around OCD, which I think is just equally as important as the stigma around any other mental health disorder and education around any other mental health disorder.
We do have the OCD workbook, don't we? Is it already on the page, or was it in the process of being
No, it is in the process.
I thought that,
So there will be an OCD booklet probably coming out in the next couple of weeks, which I will post once that's been done. But for now, there is OCD content on our TikTok and our Instagram page that you can have a look at. Also, feel free to drop us a message if you've got a question. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have, or anything that you're struggling with. Just let me know.
Well, this is just what I was about to say. Lastly, for someone who may be struggling with OCD right now, or if they're on in the midst of getting diagnosed, what would you say to them? Like, what's really helped you in finding hope and sort of healing and overcoming things?
Firstly, I think it's important that you get to know what OCD is. I think it's important you understand what's going on in your mind, you understand your triggers, you understand why you're having the intrusive thoughts why you're having the reaction to the intrusive thoughts that you are. And I think that's the most important step within OCD, because you have to know what the disorder is and how it manifests within you, and then you can focus on tackling it.
I wanted to refocus on, do you know, earlier when you had said as you got your diagnosis, there was videos that people with OCD get depression, and this really sort of panicked you and frightened you. What would you say to people that are, you know, looking on social media and they're seeing sort of really negative aspects of OCD, and they're thinking, oh my God, this is going to happen to me? How would you advise them to navigate that?
Try avoid learning until you're at a step with your OCD where you're quite confident in how it's there, what it does to your brain, how it manifests, your triggers, your themes, etc. Try to avoid looking on social media. That's quite counterintuitive because I have just said.
But the problem is a lot of people have their phone in hand and they are on social media a lot.
It's your algorithm though, isn't it? So if you're searching OCD content, you're going to get OCD
I know
content.
You did sort of hide away a bit from that, didn't you? Because you didn't want, you know, that to be shown you all the time.
I come off social media. I've come off it completely because I needed to learn what OCD was. I needed to know why it was there, how it happens, whatever type of neurological ways that it manifests. I needed to know how it affected me. I needed to know other people's stories on managing it, because that really helped me as well. On OCD websites, you can see people's like little blog pages, how they've managed it and how they've overcome it. And I just needed to know that key bit of information before I could then start outsourcing onto social media, because looking at videos that tells you you've got OCD and this can be debilitating, it can be depressing, it can cause you mass anxiety, it can cause you to not sleep at night, but that's not helping you.
And I do think it's important that if you know something is, you know, like Caitlin said, she's seen a video, you know, about OCD, you're going to get depression, so this made her come off social media. It's important to recognise if something is negatively impacting you, to pull away from it. This, you know, because the news and things, we hear a lot of horrible things in the news, and I know people within mental health, it can really affect their mental health. So if you are seeing something on social media and you recognise that it's negatively impacting you, coming off social media is going to be really beneficial for your well-being.
100%. It was the best thing that I had done, was come off social media, because I didn't have any of that negative sources anymore. It was just me and my research that I would do on the internet and not on social media.
The thing is with social media, it can be great, you know, for information and finding things out, but you know, if you are having a really difficult time, it's really important to be careful about what you're exposing yourself to.
Yes. Two little bits I want to address. So the first thing I want to address is I've recognised before that when we're talking about me accepting the OCD thoughts and just, you know, thinking, oh, this must just be how I am. I just want to explain a little bit what I mean by that.
Right, great.
Only because I don't want people to think, oh, so I just accept that I'm this horrific person.
But it's very difficult.
I don't want people to think that that's just what you do. You're not accepting the thought, and you're not accepting what's, you know, the content of the thought. You're just accepting that you're going to feel horrific. You're accepting the feeling more than anything. You're accepting, I'm going to experience this horrific anxiety, and well, what can I do about it?
So if you have an intrusive thought, you know, that I might be this horrible person, don't accept that you're a horrible person. No. Just accept that you are a person that has intrusive thoughts. And
I just thought in my head, I thought that might come across a little bit like, you know, just accept that you're a serial killer. Like, no, that's not what I mean. What I mean is just accept that you're going to feel horrifically anxious by this thought of becoming a serial killer, and you know, it's just one of those things. But the more you accept it and the more you willfully tolerate it, the less the anxiety bothers you. Second little point I just want to address is therapy for OCD. So a lot of people may just go to traditional therapists and get CBT for OCD. CBT is not proven to work very well for OCD. It's more ERP, which is exposure response prevention therapy. That is the gold standard for OCD, because it's exposing you to these intrusive thoughts that you're having, or it's exposing you to not do your compulsive behaviours, or, you know, engage in any rumination or anything to do with the OCD. And that is, if you do your research into ERP, excellent. Now,
I might want to be delving a bit too deep here, but I know you have done a little bit of exposure. Is that something you want to go into, of how, you know, doing that kind of thing, how that's affected you? Is that one for another day?
I want to leave that one for another day, only because I don't know if I'm ready to go into my exposures yet, but really good point. And I do think that on the back of doing my own exposures, I can vouch for how they work. You will feel really anxious during your exposure. You will feel horrific actually. You're basically bringing everything to mind what you try and avoid. So it is hard, and it's, you know, mentally it's challenging, very challenging, but it's so worth it in the end.
Well, you really answered my question there that I was wanting to know, like, how do you like feel that, you know, is that helping you? Is it like a scary sort of process and things like that?
Really helping me. I mean, one exposure I am willing to go into is about thoughts, because obviously I've got PRO, so I have my inward compulsions. I've done an exposure before where I've had a horrific thought. So what I've done with the thought is replayed it and replayed it and replayed it in my head until the anxiety reduces, and that is exposure. Exposure is exposing yourself to something that you're scared of, i.e. the thought or the action or whatever, and allowing your anxiety to naturally come down. And the more you do it, the easier that it gets, and the more the anxiety doesn't spike right to the top.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's like, you know, if somebody has like maybe a bit of social anxiety, or they're nervous about talking to people, they will actively avoid it because they don't want to feel like that. But the more, you know, they do talk to people or expose themselves to people, then that feeling lessens and they don't feel it. So it's a very similar sort of thing, isn't it? Sort of trying to not, like, it's facing your fears sort of head on.
Facing your fears, being comfortable with the uncomfortable, exposing yourself to things that you don't like, but becoming tolerated, I suppose. Sorry, I'm going to rephrase that. And tolerating the uncomfortableness that comes with anxiety. No one likes anxiety. It's horrific. You literally, I'm sure you've said before, you want to jump out of your own skin, because you do.
Because this is the thing with anxiety, though, it is really, really horrible. And when you're having these awful intrusive thoughts, that's creating this mass anxiety in you. Not only have you got the thoughts, but you've got these physical symptoms. You know, that you're trying. So you're battling two things. You're battling your head and you're battling your body, because, you know, it's quite a bit of a vicious cycle.
Yeah, that's true. Anyways, I'm going to shut up now.
I've thoroughly enjoyed that podcast, and I feel like it's been very informative for our listeners. You know, if you have any more questions, like Caitlin said, you can just pop us an email. Yeah,
drop us an email or drop us a message on the page. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or if you have any, you know, ideas that you want me to do a video for that may help you with your recovery journey, just let me know.
I think we do need to add that to the website, don't we? That would be good, a little ask a question box, and we can do not do it for our podcasts and things like that, and to do the content for you. I
think that would be perfect. But no, thank you so much for listening, and I hope, if anything, that my OCD journey has helped you either understand it a little bit better, or give you a little bit of reassurance and hope for your own OCD journey, or for a family member's OCD journey.
Well, yeah, because I do, like you said, I've been really able to help you and ground you. So, you know, if you can support with someone with OCD, that's great. So, yeah, I definitely think that would be great. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to subscribe and support us.
Yes, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts as well. Would be very appreciated.
And Spotify.
And Spotify, all of them. Click on them all.
Thank you so much for listening. This was Transform Pod, and we'll leave that there.
Bye.
Bye.